erasure of Indigenous histories and to honor Native American communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalalua people were dispossessed of their Indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the coastal reservation of Western Oregon. As we continue to the impacts of colonization, as we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced Indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as the Kalapuya Iligi. Kalapuya descendants are the citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Rio Grande Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions to our communities here and across our lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federally recognized tribal lands and Indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across our nation. But therefore, the Planning Commission recognizes that what we do here today will affect the many generations who will come after us. Tonight, we'll be holding a public hearing on the Council-initiated Land Use Code Amendment to increase allowable building heights for 6 parcels in the Skinner Butte height limitation area. My name is Dan Isaacson, and I'm the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission, and I am joined by my fellow planning commissioners. Tonight, we have the following staff present. Dylan Hubert, I'm pronouncing her name, Hydorn, development analyst, Will Dowdy, community development division manager, Athena Sullivan, senior planner, and Gabe Flock, who's also principal planner. I'd like to take a moment to explain what the Planning Commission is, our role, and that would be that we are unpaid volunteers appointed by the Eugene City Council to 4-year terms on the commission. The commission often makes recommendations to City Council on legislative matters such as comprehensive plan amendments and adoption of new city-wide land use regulations. We also hear appeals of decisions made by a city hearings official. Tonight's hearing is for a site-specific land use code amendment, which staff will summarize before we begin taking testimony. The Planning Commission's role in this process is to make a recommendation to the Eugene City Council on whether to approve with modification, or deny the amendment. Some of the terms we have to use here tonight are legalistic, so I'll try to explain the requirements in plain English as best I can. Since this is a hearing for a site-specific code amendment, there are unique procedures that we are legally required to follow. The decision-making process for this amendment is considered quasi-judicial, so we will use a quasi-judicial format for this public hearing. Before we begin, the Land Use Code also requires that planning commissioners disclose any legal conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, biases, or abstentions. In quasi-judicial proceedings, the parties are entitled to an impartial, neutral decision maker. To ensure this fair consideration, the Eugene Code and the Planning Commission's rules attempt to limit ex parte contacts or communications between a party and the decision maker outside the public hearing process. Each planning commissioner must disclose and describe the substance of any communications they have had about this amendment outside the public process. The planning commissioners must also disclose any conflicts of interest, that is, whether the decision they have or are about to make would or could result in a personal financial gain or loss for themselves, their relatives, or a business with which the commissioner or the commissioner's relative is associated. Finally, a planning commissioner cannot participate if he or she is biased. That is, for whatever reason, he or she is incapable of making an objective decision on this amendment. Would any counselors have anything that they would like to disclose? Commissioner Edwards.
Hi, thank you, Chair Isaacson. I'm just disclosing that I did recently have lunch with a member of staff for the applicant. We did not discuss this particular application. However, when I scanned through and I read pretty thoroughly through the packet, I did not see that it mentions that this is a quasi-judicial application process. So I just wanted to point that out because I looked for it and I didn't see it because I actually wasn't sure whether or not it was legislative or quasi-judicial. So just want to make mention of that. And if someone can point it out and if I'm wrong, my apologies. I just did not see it. So.
Thank you. Any person during his or her testimony has the right to rebut any substance of the ex parte communication that was just disclosed. So feel free, please do so if you have that. Does anyone else have any conflicts that they'd like to disclose? Hearing none. Does anyone in the audience or a member of the commission wish to challenge the impartiality of any planning commissioners? on this subject? Not hearing any. The purpose of this hearing is to receive relevant testimony on the amendment before us. I want to remind everyone that your testimony should be directed toward the approval criteria that you believe apply to this amendment. We ask you to frame your testimony in terms of the applicable approval criteria because the Eugene Code requires that our recommendation be based on that approval criteria. For reference, the applicable criteria are listed in the findings that was prepared as part of the staff report. I would like now to invite our moderator, Linda Baker, to provide instructions for how to provide testimony.
Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Baker, and I will be the moderator for tonight's meeting. I'm going to cover a few housekeeping items before we begin with regular proceedings. Firstly, I want to thank everyone for joining us in this virtual hearing and note that tonight's hearing is being recorded. Since we're meeting virtually, I'm going to provide instructions on how to request to speak during the public testimony section. When staff announces that it is time for testimony, you can get in the queue by raising your virtual hand. To do this, please click the raise hand button in the menu if you're joining us on computer, tablet, or smart device. If you're joining us by phone, you must dial *9. At the beginning of testimony, you should start by stating your name, your address, and whether you're in support, opposition, or neutral to the proposal. Public testimony time is 3 minutes long. I will provide you a time reminder when you have 30 seconds left to speak. And once the time is up, you'll be returned to attendee status. More instructions will be provided prior to the beginning of the public testimony section of our hearing tonight. With that, it is great to have everyone here tonight, and I will hand it back to the Eugene Planning Commission Chair.
Thank you. Traditionally, for quasi-judicial proceedings, once the public hearing is open, speakers were called on in the following order: those in support, including the applicant, those in a neutral position, and those opposed. However, due to the limitations of the virtual hearing platform and the fact that this is a city-initiated amendment, we have had to make some adjustments. Testimony will be received in order that interested parties have requested to speak, and the city will not be testifying. As we are unable to fill out a request to speak form, all interested parties providing testimony will be asked to begin by clearly stating their name, address, and whether they support or whether they're in support, neutral, or in opposition to the proposal. Following public testimony, city staff will have the opportunity to respond to the testimony provided and answer any questions that might come up. Planning commissioners, if you have any questions about someone's testimony, you should ask those questions following that individual's testimony. Following the conclusion of the public testimony, staff will have a chance to respond to the public testimony presented, and commissioners will have the opportunity to ask additional questions of staff. I'm also supposed to remind everyone that the failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to allow the Planning Commission and parties to respond may preclude future appeals on that issue. In other words, now is your opportunity to raise issues as clearly as you can so the city and other parties can address them. As a reminder, the Planning Commission will not make a final decision on this amendment. This will be a recommendation to City Council, who will hold their own public hearing and allow new evidence that may have been received before making a final decision. We'll begin with a summary of the proposed land use code amendment with Dylan.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Start sharing my presentation here. All right, can everyone see my first slide?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Dylan Huber-Heidorn. I'm a development analyst for the city's Community Development Division. The item before you tonight is a proposed amendment to the Eugene Code section on the Skinner Butte Height Limitation Area. I'll refer to that as the HLA throughout. Among other things, my division works to identify development projects that are deemed to provide significant benefits for the community and to help those projects find ways to move forward and increase their positive impacts. In this case, we approached City Council with a proposal to amend the HLA in order to create opportunities for additional residential development. On July 25th, Council voted unanimously to initiate the code amendment, but it's important to remember that that does not constitute a recommendation. Staff were directed to provide information and answer questions to assist the Planning Commission in making a recommendation on the proposed amendment, and I'm here to do that tonight. So I'll start with an overview of the origins and details of the current HLA, and I'll briefly describe the potential future developments that spurred this conversation. I'll talk a bit about the downtown plan, which holds a lot of policy guidance for the downtown area, and then I'll conclude with some next steps for the amendment. The Skinner Butte height limitation area was created in 1968, and it was a response to the construction of Yapoa Terrace. That's the highest structure in Lane County, and the HLA was a result of community backlash to such a high building being built right at the base of the butte. The goal of the HLA is stated to preserve views to and from the butte. Geographically, the HLA extends along the Willamette River from Washington Street to Coburg Road at the Ferry Street Bridge, and from the river south to 6th Avenue. Within most of the height limitation area, development's limited in height with the two-tiered approach. Height limits are based on the elevation of the ground grade above sea level. Anywhere the ground grade is 460 feet or lower, structures are limited to 500 feet in total height. Again, that's above sea level, not 500-foot buildings. Where the existing grade is higher than 460 feet above sea level, buildings can be up to 40 feet high. The most significant change to the HLA in its history has been an amendment made in 2018, which created a height transition area along 6th Avenue. Within that half-block wide area, buildings can be constructed up to 530 feet instead of 500. The change affected a lot of properties along 6th, but it was particularly useful to the developers of the 5th Street Market, OB companies, which relied on the increased height allowance to build the Market Alley expansion, the Gordon Hotel, and the Gordon Lofts apartments. The figure on this slide is proposed to replace the figure in the current code, and it shows the existing area of the increased height limits created along 6th Avenue in 2018. That's the row of the hash marks along the bottom. The proposed amendment would extend that 530-foot height allowance to 6 additional parcels, which are also shown here. Those parcels make up 2 distinct development sites, one on the south side of 5th Avenue between Oak and Pearl Streets, and one on the other side of 5th Avenue, where Oak Street terminates at the north end of downtown. Those 2 potential future developments aren't on the table tonight. If OB Companies is able to apply for development permits for new market expansions in the future, the city will have a chance to review the designs and other details at that time. That's important to remember that this hearing is limited to the proposed change to the height limitation codes. To be brief about them, the developer would like those developments to include a pair of 7-story, roughly 100-foot high mixed-use buildings with about 300 to 325 housing units between the 2 of them, but they're currently limited to 70 feet by the HLA, and that won't work for that kind of density. For reference, the buildings they have in mind would be very close to the height of Gordon Lofts, directly to the south, which was built to take advantage of the new opportunities for housing created by the 2018 amendment. The diagrams on this slide show the relationships between the height limits and various buildings that are throughout this part of downtown. It's a sort of section view of major developments that extends from the top of Skinner Butte down Oak Street, that blue line. In both images, the orange represents the potential development on the north side of Oak Street. You can see the current 500-foot height limit along with the proposed 530-foot limit, as well as Gordon Lofts, which was built close to that 530-foot cutoff. Across 6th Avenue, where the HLA is not in effect, you can see the Graduate Hotel, which rises 572 feet above sea level. And closest to the butte, you have Yapoa at 212 feet high or 684 feet above sea level. The next pair of drawings show the impact of the HLA in relation to other zoning rules on these properties. If the HLA wasn't in effect on the 6 parcels we're discussing tonight, their zoning would allow for 120-foot high buildings. Across the street, the Graduate Hotel zoning allowed for 150. The HLA was created to preserve views to and from the butte, but part of the reason community development proposed this change to city council is that we simply don't see how the change from 70-foot buildings to 100-foot buildings makes that much of a difference. And we believe the additional flexibility for housing development is worth the trade-off. I have some slides to illustrate that. This image shows one of the development sites from 5th Avenue. You can clearly see the butte here, but that's only because the parcels are currently in use as a parking lot. Pretty much any structure that you built on this site would obscure the view of the butte, including buildings much shorter than what's currently allowed in code. So adding a dashed line here shows on this photo roughly where the roof line would be for a 2-story building if you were standing in this spot. Oak Street has some of the clearest views of the Butte, and if you back up down 6th Avenue, you can see over a 2-story building pretty easily. However, if the owners built a 70-foot building, as they could under the current code, it would completely block the Butte. You can see from the dash line here, that's rough but pretty close approximation of where the top of a building would be. The extra 30-foot proposed by the height amendment would bring a building up to the higher dash line, as you can see now. And the effect on the Butte, the view is pretty much the same. There are places here and there throughout downtown where you can glimpse the Butte, but for the most part, the view is obstructed by other buildings and street trees. You'd have to look really, really carefully to find places where an extra 30 feet of building height makes a difference, 70 to 100 feet. And you can see that in the minimal difference it makes viewing it from Oak Street, which again is one of the clearest corridors to the Butte anywhere in downtown. I want to touch briefly on the downtown plan, since the policies it contains for downtown development don't come up every day. The map shows a portion of the downtown plan area and a few of the designated development opportunity areas that it lists as special priorities. The site that makes up the top of the list is known as the county elections block. It includes one of the future development sites, and site number 2 is the train depot area, which includes the development site on the north side of 5th Avenue. And in addition to this map and list of priority development sites, the downtown plan also has a number of policies relevant to the development of these sites and the implementation of the height limitation area. It includes some general policies like supporting urban density, livability, diversity, and vitality downtown. The plan guides the city to promote multi-unit housing in both the core and the edges of downtown. It has a policy to use development tools and incentives to encourage development that provides character and density. One policy directs the city to emphasize 5th Avenue as a designated great street through public improvements and development guidelines. And finally, it says that we should facilitate dense development on sites between the core of downtown and the river. Thanks to the ongoing work to develop the downtown riverfront, 5th Avenue is now a gateway to not just the river, but a whole new district downtown. So as far as next steps go, as I mentioned, City Council voted to initiate the code amendment on July 25th. The Planning Commission is currently holding the first public hearing on this proposed code amendment. After Planning Commission delivers their recommendation, City Council will hold their public hearing and final decision on this issue. They're currently scheduled for public hearing on January 17th. So we've framed this proposal in a way that we think balances the purposes of the height limitation area, which would still very much be in effect, with the needs for finding opportunities to promote housing development and improve downtown. I hand it back to you, Chair, and I'll be here for the duration of the hearing if you have any questions.
Well, thank you. Now I would like to open the public hearing of the Eugene Planning Commission. If you would like to speak and have not already raised your hand, please raise your virtual hand now. You can raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon if you're on a computer, or by dialing *9 if you're joining by phone. We encourage you to submit any written testimony that you have as well. City staff will announce the first person to give testimony. Staff will also announce who is next in the speaker's queue. For all participants giving testimony, when it is your turn to speak, staff will unmute you. As a reminder, please begin by saying your full name, your address, and whether you are in support of, neutral toward, or opposed to this amendment. Ms. Baker.
Hi again, everyone. I will announce whose turn it is to provide public testimony, as well as announcing who is up next. When you are announced for public testimony, you will be promoted to a Zoom panelist, which will allow you to unmute and turn on your video if you choose. Please do not unmute or turn on your video until it is your turn for public testimony. Please start by clearly stating your name, address, and whether you're in support, opposition, or neutral to the proposal. Public testimony is up to 3 minutes long, and when your public testimony is concluded, you will be returned to the Zoom attendee status. If any technical difficulties are encountered, we will move on to the next person in the queue and try again after that person's comment. With these instructions out of the way, Sarah Means will be our first person tonight. And I am adding you as a Zoom panelist. Hold on one moment. Sarah, are you having technical difficulties?
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you.
Great, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Sarah Means, 296 East 5th Avenue in Eugene. I'm here representing OB Companies. I wish to testify in support of the proposed code amendment that would allow for an increase in height on 6 parcels adjacent to the existing 5th Street Public Market and the recent market expansion. The proposal to increase the height limitation by 30 feet is not only consistent with the applicable criteria and plans, but will also make a positive impact on future development. The subject sites are currently surface parking lots. The Eugene Downtown Plan includes several policies that support the redevelopment of sites such as these to promote vibrancy in the downtown area. In fact, the intention is to develop these sites with mixed-use residential buildings, creating more housing units in the market district and broader downtown area. This modest increase may allow for more than 100 residential units to be realized across the 2 developments. This is substantial, particularly in an environment where we need to increase housing supply by a significant amount. I also want to acknowledge the 2 historic buildings adjacent to the northern parcels. Oregon Electric Station and the Southern Pacific Passenger Depot are valuable assets in our community and will remain. We look forward to the opportunity ahead to reactivate these important buildings. Again, I urge your support for the file CA 22-3 to amend the Skinner Butte height limitation area. Thank you for your time, consideration, and service to our community.
And Sarah, could you repeat your address again, please?
296 East 5th Avenue.
Thank you so much. And Sarah is the only person that we had providing public testimony. I say we give about a minute to see if anyone else wants to comment. All right, so we do not have any more public testimony.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Baker. Does staff have any comments or would like to respond? Okay. Do commissioners have any questions of staff? Also, keep in mind that there will be an opportunity to ask questions of staff following the close of the hearing for any items that may be needed to be followed up on during deliberations. Typically, this is the time where the applicant has the opportunity to present any final rebuttal. In this case, the city has initiated the land code amendment. I don't see any hands. Okay. Does staff have any final comments? Okay, well then the planning commission public record is now closed. Did we have any? There wasn't any request to hold the record open, correct?
That's correct. There was no request for that.
Okay. Okay, then I think we're ready to move on into the deliberations if that's what we want to do at a later point. There aren't any questions for staff that require research. The planning commission will begin deliberations and vote to provide a recommendation to city council to approve with modifications, or deny the land use code amendment. I have Commissioner Ramey.
Thank you, Chair. I think Commissioner Bailey may have nudged me out a little bit in line here. So with my apologies, I'll be brief. I've been involved with the downtown planning for boy, decades, several rounds with local architects doing working charrettes on downtown development, and at least 1 or 2 on public advisory commissions about downtown and returning to the river. And from my experience, this is entirely consistent with that idea. And so it really helps to bring more density to downtown where we need it, and increases density in housing, which we desperately need housing. So I'll be in favor of this for those reasons. I do have a question for staff. I wonder if you can address the issues that were raised about goal 10 in the testimony, just to be sure I understand what those issues are and how the city will be responding to them. Thank you.
Commissioner Bailey.
Thank you. I believe my question was similar. Is goal 10 the one where the person in opposition raised the issue of affordability? Because that was a question that came up for me. In general, I'm very much in favor with everything that I read and saw so far. But had a question about that one letter that came in opposition. I don't know if anyone is available to respond to that. And also had a question about goal 6. Does nothing from goal 6 impact this amendment at all?
I am happy to provide a response to those questions now.
Thank you.
So the letter in response to goal 10 came from the Fair Housing Council, as well as I forget the name of the other folks that wrote the letter. I did not necessarily read that as being in opposition to this amendment. I read that as that group making a point that the city should be providing more robust goal 10 findings. What I will share is that we actually receive a lot of these letters from that particular group on a number of different applications throughout the city. And in response to this particular letter, we did update the findings. I can go into as much detail as you would like, but I'll kind of keep it simple here. The short of it is that when we adopted our urban growth boundary, we came up with how many units of housing we thought we needed across the city and categorized those different areas for low density residential, medium density residential, or high density residential. And those lands were set aside for that particular housing category. And then anytime we take on an amendment, the question comes up, do we need to consider whether or not we're still consistent with what we assumed when we adopted our urban growth boundary? In this particular case, we are still consistent with the assumptions that were made during our urban growth boundary process, because these particular parcels of land were shown as protected or committed lands, which means that we did not assume a particular amount of housing on these properties. So we don't need to do anything to update those goal 10 amendments. And then give me just a second for your question on goal 6. The goal 6 is more geared towards things like air and streams in our community. We have adopted protections for waterways in our community, and these amendments to allow for additional height would not impact those already adopted provisions that are part of our code.
And Mr. Brantley, you still have your hand raised. Is there, you have another question? Okay. Does anybody else have any further questions or deliberations? So my paper does not have a call for a vote. Do we, to staff, are you expecting to have a call for a vote tonight, or do we want to, what is the plan here from staff?
Yes, that is an option available to you all this evening. I believe we were also made aware of a few minor discrepancies in some dates in our findings ahead of this hearing. So when you call for a vote, you could just provide general direction for staff to update those before this packet goes before City Council. And I'm happy I can provide you with a motion, or if you have one prepared, any one of you could choose to make that if you would like to.
Commissioner Lear.
So a little clarification there. I was preparing to make a motion out the, so would you like us to make a motion that, am I understanding correctly, would encompass these minor date changes as well?
That is correct.
And the goal 10.
We actually already made the goal 10 changes.
We haven't seen them.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to offer an example motion that would incorporate those changes that you're looking for?
Yes, let me pull that up. You could move to recommend approval of the ordinance included as attachment A to the agenda item summary with the findings updated to reflect the hearing date of December 6th and findings to reflect appropriate changes for goal 10.
So that's to be too much for us to remember. Is there a way that you can put that up and someone, if they feel so inclined, can raise their hand?
So moved.
There you go. We have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Lear. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Edwards has offered up a second. Do we have anybody speak to the motion? Or Commissioner Lear, you can just pass it on for a vote.
I would just note quickly that the staff's presentation was excellent and demonstrated that there appears to be a very negligible effect on the view, but a potentially significant effect on the creation of more housing. I'd leave it at that.
Anybody else like to speak to the motion? Okay, here now let's call for the question. All those in favor of the motion to pass this along to the City Council signify by raising your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Wonderful. City staff, do you have anything additional for the Planning Commission?
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful evening. Thank you very much. I think we are adjourned.